Chapter 6. They came together so spontaneously that their behavior seemed unconnected with any conscious act of will. When they met in the middle of the room, Bullet put one of his huge, powerful hands on Sybil's shoulder, covering it completely, and drew her to him with the other hand, and there was an unexpected gentleness about the gesture. He took off her dark glasses. Then his great auburn head, so like a wild beast muzzle, bent toward her pale face and kissed her eyelids. Instantly the tension went out of Sybil's body. She swayed, pressing herself forward close against his huge muscular torso, as though she wanted to melt into it. This demonstration of affection took place so quickly and was so fundamentally wholesome that I felt neither shame nor embarrassment at being a witness to it. The behavior of Bullet and his wife was so sincere and natural that it entirely avoided any possible charge of tactlessness. A wife and husband who had been separated all day by their several duties were now reunited and had kissed each other. That was all. What was there to hide? But this I knew. Watching the gestures and expressions of Sybil and her husband, I saw in them, beyond any shadow of doubt, a shining proof of all that love can bring to two people, once and forever. I saw their tenderness, integrity, certainty, everything that a man and a woman can desire and get, each from the other, to soothe away their deepest sorrows or perplexities, and to share in a true heaven-made marriage. I found myself thinking about the little white chapel standing in the bush at the edge of the Rift Valley's wild splendors. It was here that Bullet had married Sybil. It was not hard to picture the naive solemnity, the absolute faith and trust, the enchanted solitude, which they carried with them on that day. Since then 10 years had passed, but nothing had changed for them or between them, and so it would continue till the end of their life together, while a single breath of life still animated her pale, exhausted face, and his big, ruddy, half-animal countenance under its thatch of auburn hair. This embrace, with its simple, complete gesture of release and protectiveness, only lasted a few brief seconds. Bullet and Sybil drew apart almost as soon as they had kissed, but it was not till Sybil's eye actually caught mine afterward that she remembered my presence. Then the glow of happiness abruptly faded in her lovely eyes, and she drew on her dark glasses with that automatic gesture I had already come to know well. The lines down her cheek seemed deeper. She shivered. Once again her nerves were strained, nearly to the breaking point. Yet so far as I could see, nothing which Sybil had told me could justify such a dramatic transformation. "I'm terribly sorry," she said. "I couldn't persuade Patricia to come in here. You must forgive her. She isn't used to normal social behavior." Bullet had not shifted. His big features were still settled in a calm, tranquil expression, but I saw, watching him, that he had become peculiarly alert and attentive. He seemed to me well aware of the impalpable tension that had made itself felt in the atmosphere, that indefinable something which enables a stranger, on occasion, to surmise the return to a conscience level of some old, persistent, secret bone of contention between two long married and mutually devoted people. I laughed and said, "After all, the child's been brought up in the wilds of Kilimanjaro. It's quite natural for her not to want any contact with people like me. She has nothing to do with the world we come from." Bullett's face broke into a grateful smile. This reaction was no less emphatic than his burst of anger had been a few minutes before, and seemed to me equally exaggerated and devoid of any reasonable basis. "That's right," he said mildly. "It's quite natural." Sybil cried out, her lower lip trembling a little as she spoke. "But, John, if we let things go on like this, what will happen? If Patricia continues to live here, she'll turn into an impossible little savage. We've got to do something." Bullett's voice became gentler still. "We tried once, darling. Remember, school simply made the child ill." "She was 2 years younger then," Sybil persisted. "It's a different proposition today. We must think about the child's future." Two feverish patches of color flushed up red on either cheek. Then abruptly, she dragged me into the argument. "Don't you agree," she said, "that one day Patricia will be the first person to blame us for her poor education?" Bullitt made no comment, but his oddly pale eyes, with their network of fine red veins, sunshine or overdrinking, never left mine. With every ounce of strength he possessed, his look proclaimed to me he was willing me to give the opposite answer to that for which his wife hoped. Each of them, according to their natures, was trying to enroll me as a supporter in this vital argument. And to what end? To settle the future position of a small girl in gray overalls, a small girl who belonged to a dawn world inhabited by beasts of prey. How could a casual guest possibly take sides in such a case? I thought of Patricia, with her urchin's haircut. It was this private memory, and this alone, which finally made up my mind. Patricia's parents could not possibly know what had influenced my decision. In a cheerfully casual voice, which suggested that the real point of the discussion had gone over my head, I remarked, "I'm always on the child's side. It's probably because I've never had any of my own. I'm afraid my sympathies are all with Patricia." There was a brief silence. Then Sybil produced a very artificial smile and said, "Please forgive us for dragging you into our family problems. You didn't come all this way just for that." "Too true," Bullitt observed. He was smiling himself, but as a man might after meeting an old and trusted friend whom he hadn't seen for years. "I'll show you round the reserve myself," he went on, half raising one enormous paw as though to slap me on the back. "I can show you some sights that very few people have ever seen." Then he glanced at his wife, who seemed at this moment very far away from us, and added, almost timidly, "Why don't you come too, darling? Just this once, in honor of our guest. It will be like old times, and I'm sure it'd do you good." Sybil made no reply to this. Instead, she suddenly said to me, "My God, what will Lise think when she hears you haven't met Patricia?" "Lise?" Bullet asked, puzzled. "Why Lise?" "Our guest is a friend of hers," Sybil explained. "I never had a moment to tell you. Lise gave him a letter of introduction to me, and of course he and Lise will be seeing one another again very soon." Every time Sybil uttered Lise's name, her voice seemed more lively and her face younger. Bullet's features, on the other hand, seemed to become somehow remote. He withdrew himself behind an invisible barrier. There was no trace left in either of them of that friendliness which he had shown me a moment ago. "When are you leaving?" Sybil asked me. "Tomorrow," Bullet said, forestalling my reply with almost open rudeness. "That's what's down in the book anyway." "Tomorrow?" Sybil exclaimed. "So soon? Then I must begin my letter to Lise right away. There are so many things I want to tell her. You know, since I've met you, I feel she's much more real, much nearer me." Bullet went and poured himself another whiskey. "I haven't even offered you any proper entertainment," Sybil ran on. "You must come back this evening and have a nice cozy tea party with us. There won't be anything else for you to do in any case. John's forbidden vehicles to move about the reserve after dark. Haven't you, John?" Bullet muttered something about the headlights dazzling the animals. "I'd be delighted to come," I told Sybil. "There's no immediate hurry about your letter. My driver can collect it tomorrow before we leave." Bullet stared at me for a moment over his full glass of scotch. "Will you kindly tell me," he inquired, with some abruptness, "why this driver of yours spent the night in his car when there was a bed at his disposal in the servants' quarters? I suppose this fine Nairobi gentleman is too high and mighty to sleep under the same roof as a bunch of up-country niggers." "It wasn't like that at all," I said. "Bogo and I have made a very long circular trip together, as far as Lake Kivu. All the hotels refused accommodation to natives, except in filthy little kennels. Bogo got into the habit of sleeping in the car. He may be a simple, primitive creature, but he has a sense of dignity." "Dignity?" Bullet repeated through his teeth. "Dignity?" His eyes wandered toward the long rhinoceros hide whip hanging over the arm of a chair, then returned to contemplate the bottom of his whiskey glass. "I was born in Rhodesia," he said suddenly. "My father was a district officer, in charge of a very large area. When I was 14, I went on my first safari, with another boy of the same age. One day we found ourselves in lion country, where hunting was strictly forbidden. Suddenly we saw a bush move. The official ban notwithstanding, we fired, and one of us scored a hit. But our victim turned out to be a native, dead as a doornail. We went off and reported the accident to the chief of the nearest village." an old Negro. Here, Bullet raised his eyes and glanced quickly at me. Of considerable dignity, he said, "You're very lucky it wasn't a lion. Your father would never have forgiven you." And that was true enough. My father had the law in his blood. "John, why do you rake up these old stories?" Sybil said in a low voice. "You know how I hate them, and honestly, they make you sound like a savage yourself." Bullet drank up without answering, went and picked up his kiboko, and said to me, "If you don't mind, I've got some work to do now. I'll detail a guard to show you round the reserve." He did not look at me as he spoke. Then he stretched himself, arms folded, and the room suddenly seemed much smaller. "John," Sybil said quickly, "promise me you'll do one thing. Tell Patricia to stop behaving so badly and make her come and have tea with us. Whatever happens, our guest must be able to discuss her with Lise when he gets home." The vast fist clutching the rawhide whip tightened its grip on the stock. Then it relaxed once more. Bullet's shaggy great head, like that of a sick, unhappy animal, bent down toward his wife. Then he said, very tenderly, "I promise, darling." His lips brushed her hair. She pressed herself against him, and he held her as close and as lovingly as he had done earlier. Chapter 7. I left Sybil a few moments later, and she made no effort to stop me going. Her entire mind was concentrated on the letter she was about to write, and the effect it would have on its recipient. As I came out of the bungalow, the fierce, blinding heat dazzled and half-stunned me with the violence of its impact. I stopped, despite myself. Bullet was standing bareheaded beside his vehicle, a mud-spattered Land Rover, and giving instructions to Kihoro, his tracker. This was the sacred, lame, one-eyed old native I had seen earlier. Bullet pretended not to notice me, but Kihoro shot me a quick, piercing glance with his one eye, and began to gabble something at great speed to his master. I turned away and walked off in the direction of my bungalow. I had reached the edge of the clearing and was just about to plunge into the thorny makai which bordered it, when a long, obviously human shadow appeared beside mine. I stopped and found Bullet standing at my elbow. I experienced a curious, instantaneous feeling of coolness. Bullet's body was so broad and big that it protected me from the sun, but at the same time I felt an uneasy qualm at the way in which he had padded silently after me, and as always taken me off my guard. Why had he done it this time? What did he still hope to get out of me? Presumably with the intention of avoiding my gaze. He was staring up at the tall, thorny trees that towered behind my head. His arms hung motionless at his sides, but the tips of his fingers drummed nervously on his bare bronzed thighs. I noticed that his nails were cut short and kept scrupulously clean. He seemed uneasy. Finally, he said, coughing, "If you like, We can stroll along together. I'm going to the native village, and your compound is on the way." He walked like a native beater, with quick, easy steps, bending forward a little as he moved. I could hardly keep up with him. Very quickly, we found ourselves in the heart of the bush. Then Bullet suddenly stopped and spun round on his heel to face me, completely blocking the narrow path. His arms were very slightly bent, and his clenched fist held in at hip level. His red-veined eyes stared fixedly into mine, and there were deep lines visible on his forehead, between the thatch of auburn hair and the heavy, reddish eyebrows. I thought, stupidly enough, in all conscience, that he was about to attack me and knock me out. This may have been a lunatic notion, but then I was beginning to find something decidedly lunatic about Bullet's general behavior. A heavy silence, to which the earth, the heat, and the tall trees surrounding us all contributed, hung in the air between us. Somehow it had to be broken. "What's the matter?" I asked. Bullet said, slowly and softly, "You were out near the big water hole this morning." The man standing in front of me was, physically speaking, a very dangerous proposition, and I could not understand, much less foresee, any of his moods or impulses. Nevertheless, my first instinctive thought was that Patricia had betrayed me. This hurt me so acutely that I said, despite myself, "You mean to say that your daughter informed on me?" "Her," said Bullet, shrugging. "I haven't seen her since yesterday. But nevertheless, you still know that I was where I had no business to be, don't you? And that she was with me." "That was exactly what I want to talk to you about," Bullet said. He hesitated, the perplexed lines on his forehead deepening under the wiry russet hair. Then he said, in some irritation, "I don't know how on earth to put this business to you. Listen, I can honestly swear I had no idea that the area was out of bounds to visitors, but if you feel it's your duty to turn me out, well, I'm quite ready to leave in an hour's time instead of staying till tomorrow. Fair enough." Bullet shook his head and smiled in a nervous, unpremeditated way, which gave a strange charm to his wild beast features. "Even supposing I wanted to throw you out," he said, "how could I possibly do it? Sybil's already all worked up by the idea of her special tea party. She doesn't often have an opportunity for that sort of thing, poor dear." Then, his embarrassment suddenly gone, Bullet said, with a fine frankness and simplicity that exactly matched his outward physical appearance, "Thank you. I'm truly grateful to you for not telling my wife you saw Patricia early this morning, and more especially for not saying where you saw her." Bullet wiped his perspiring face with the back of his hand. I had previously seen him come back from a long walk in the blazing sun without a single drop of sweat on him, and in any case we were standing in the shade of the huge thorn trees. I hardly knew what kind of response to make to this unexpected tribute. A few yards away from us, an impala suddenly bounded across the path. A few birds flew up out of the undergrowth and in the treetops. I could hear the monkeys chattering. Bullet said, "If my wife had any idea what Pat gets up to every morning, I don't know what." He broke off, fumbling for words, wiped his forehead again, and concluded lamely, "It'd make things very difficult for everyone concerned." He stood there a moment longer, shifting from one foot to the other, scratching his head under its thick mat of auburn hair. "What I'm trying to find out," Bullet said, not looking at me, "is why you didn't say anything. You weren't in the picture. Did Sybil tell you something privately that put you on your guard?" "Certainly not, and I'm by no means certain myself just why I kept quiet. I think the truth of it is that I felt my meeting with your daughter was a secret between the two of us. But why should it have been?" "Why?" I echoed, and caught myself up short, afraid of being laughed at. And then, with the scent and the small crackling noises of the bush all around me, perhaps too because I sensed a certain animal simplicity about Bullet himself, I took the plunge and told him everything. I described the instinctive urge that had driven me to seek out the wild beast in their fantastic meeting place at the foot of Kilimanjaro. I admitted my desperate longing for their friendship and the impossibility of ever attaining it as far as I was concerned, and I told how a little girl in gray overalls had for a few brief moments won me access to their kingdom. At first, still embarrassed to be making this kind of confession, I kept my eyes fixed on the dry, thorny undergrowth at my feet, and all I could see of Bullet were his legs, great sturdy columns the color of baked clay. Nevertheless, his heavy, concentrated breathing hinted at the intensity of his interest in my story, and this gradually removed my embarrassment. After a while, I raised my head and addressed him directly. Not a muscle stirred in his face as he listened, but his expression was one of incredulous delight. When I had finished, he said, slowly and awkwardly, "Then I mean, you feel there's something between Pat and the animals. You, a town dweller, something special, something that can't be disturbed, don't you?" He fell silent, one hand unconsciously going up to scrabble in his hair again. At the same time, it struck me, he was examining my appearance in a completely new way, as though hunting for some hidden blemish or mark of deformity. But in that case, he burst out finally, "How in heaven's name can you be a friend of Lise Darbois?" "I'm not," I said. "Far from it. I scarcely know her, and from the little I've seen, even that degree of acquaintance strikes me as undesirable." The nervous, indecisive, and distinctly charming smile I had already observed now broke out again on Bullet's face. "Come on," I said. "Own up. You'd have been delighted to lay into me with that rhino whip of yours, simply and solely on account of that young lady, wouldn't you?" "Too bloody true I would," Bullet said, with classic simplicity. Then he suddenly exploded into a tremendous, ingenious burst of laughter that seemed to fill the whole forest. At this moment, he seemed half child, half ogre. Between two convulsive snorts of mirth, he gasped again. Too bloody true, I'd have taken that kiboko to you all right. Nearly out of breath, he repeated the word kiboko several times, till his hysteria became contagious, and I too thought this word one of the funniest things I had ever heard. Then I began to laugh with him, and we stood there on the bush track, facing each other still, laughing till the tears ran down our cheeks. It was at this moment that the first spark of real friendship was kindled between us. When the paroxysms died down, and Bullet began talking to me again, his tone was completely different. Now he treated me as an intimate, who knew all the hidden secrets of his home life. Who would suppose, he said, with controlled violence, that a stupid, empty-headed, doll-like lease could do us so much harm from 8,000 odd miles away? Without meaning to, or even having any notion of her effect on you, I put in. Bullet shook his head obstinately. That makes no difference, he said. I still hate her guts. The only thing I'm interested in is the happiness of Sybil and our child. He swung round and set off down the track once more, but his movements were slower now, and his head was bent in thought. After thrashing out his ideas for a while, he began to talk again, without turning round. His broad back completely blotted out the view for me, and his words marched in time with our footsteps. Don't think I'm completely mad because I let Pat run wild in the bush and mingle with the animals as she pleases, he said. To begin with, she undoubtedly does have an uncanny power over them. That's something that's either there or not. Nothing to be done about it. You can know animals like the back of your hand and still not have that basic rapport with them. Take me, for example. I've lived among wild beasts all my life, but it's hopeless to pretend I've got the touch. It's something you're born with, and Pat has it. I hurried after Bullet's huge, retreating figure, trying to tread exactly in his footsteps, so as not to disturb this revelatory vein. The slow, hoarse voice talked on, taking me further into Patricia's mysterious world. I've known several men who had the gift, Bullet said. 1 or 2 were Europeans. Most were natives. But none of them could hold a candle to Pat. She was born with it. Besides, she's been brought up among wild animals. Most important of all, Bullet hesitated very slightly at this point. She's never harmed them in any way. They understand each other. There's an alliance between them. There was one question I could not resist asking at this point. Is that a sufficient guarantee of her safety? She thinks so, Bullet said, still striding ahead with his back to me, and she ought to know better than we do. But I haven't got her innocent faith, so I have her watched by Kihoro. That crippled old tracker, I exclaimed. Don't get any mistaken ideas about him, Bullet said, quickening his pace. Kihoro may be a cripple, but he can move faster than a leopard when he needs to, and more quietly. If I went round spying on her, Patricia would hear me at once, even though I know the game well. But Kahoro is always just behind her shadow, and she never suspects a thing. It doesn't matter about his having only one eye either. He's quicker and more accurate with a gun than I am, and I'm reckoned to be one of the best shots in East Africa. Bullet turned round. There was an unfamiliar light in his eye, and his voice sounded suddenly younger. Do you know, there was a time once when Kahoro never asked for more than one cartridge, no matter what dangerous beast he was stalking, lion, elephant, even buffalo, and... Bullet broke off abruptly, gnawing with savage violence at his lower lip, as though to punish himself for some fault which had escaped my notice. Don't worry, he said. His cartridge pouches are always full when he goes out to guard Pat. The path became wider at this point, and we walked side by side in silence for a little. I said, "It was obviously Kahoro who told you about my meeting with Patricia." "Yes, but it's vital that she shouldn't know he's always watching her. It would completely spoil her private game. And that's the only real pleasure she can get around here." We were approaching a group of huts, which certainly wasn't the visitor's compound. Without noticing, I had accompanied Bullet as far as the native village. Chapter 8. A score or so of straw shacks, camouflaged by high thorny scrub, served as living quarters for the staff of the reserve, guards, bearers, kitchen workers, together with their families. More solidly constructed buildings housed an electric generator, a workshop for general repairs, a gasoline dump, and a store for clothing and food supplies. The occupants of this little village swarmed out and surrounded Bullet the moment he appeared. The rangers were in uniform, khaki drill tunics with big metal buttons, shorts, and pork pie forage caps of the same material, and cartridge belts strapped round their waist. The mechanic wore greasy old rags, while the bearers sported long white tunics, nipped in at the waist with broad blue cummerbunds. The clerks were dressed in European clothes, even down to a collar and tie. The women's cotton wraps presented a cheerful spectrum of bright, crude, primary colors, most of which clashed excruciatingly with each other. The children were stark naked. There was no doubt about the kind of welcome Bullet got. The giant, red-headed warden was immensely popular in the village. Shouts of delight, even impromptu songs, greeted him. A warm, ingenious affection shone from all these beaming black faces. Bullet glanced significantly at me. "You see how it is," his expression seemed to say. "Despite the kiboko and my unfortunate adventure in Rhodesia, you see how it is." In his eyes I could see crystallized all the absolute self-assurance and moral certainty which I had found, on countless occasions, in the spoken assumptions of old colonial administrators and their sons, the natural superiority of the white races, the natural inferiority of these childish, primitive people who neither valued nor respected, they said, any argument except physical force. I was unable to share these beliefs. They had only possessed any cognizency as long as the indigenous population took them for granted, but that day was long past. One or two individual Europeans might appear to justify these assumptions by virtue of their powerful personalities and a kind of instinctive superiority. It was, too, in just such isolated, God-forsaken districts as this one that modern social progress had made least progress. The time was coming, had indeed come, when the relationship between men of different color would have to be radically revised, but it would have been pure waste of time, and I had little enough time to spare for me to argue this point with Bullitt. He wouldn't listen to a word I said. He had his own notions of eternal verities well established already. Now he fended off the noisy crowd with great good humor, swiping every head within range, and gently rolling naked, delighted pickaninnies over in the dust with the toe of his boot. Then he got the Rangers on parade, and instantly the whole atmosphere changed. The guards stood to attention, silent and motionless, arms stiffly by their sides, heels together, while he gave them their orders. Then they dismissed to their huts. "I'd better fill you in," Bullitt said. "Those chaps have been told not to let any Maasai out of their sight for a single moment during the next week, till they move on, in fact. You allow these Maasai to camp in the reserve." "Oh, we've got to tolerate them up to a point. The districts belonged to them since God knows when, and they're no trouble really. They stick to their prescribed grazing grounds." "Then why do you need to keep such a close eye on them?" "To protect the lions," Bullitt said. "The traditional ambition of every Maasai, the achievement that will win him the highest renown, is to kill a lion, with spear and knife alone. The practice is officially forbidden throughout the colony, but that doesn't stop them having a go on the quiet. Many of them never come back. They don't care." Bullitt shrugged his shoulders. "Nor do I. A few blacks the less, even Maasai. Well, but I have no intention of letting them harm my lions." The Rangers came out of their huts. Their cartridge belts were full, and they carried carbines. They went off into the bush, chattering in great spirits. I was about to set off back to my own bungalow when Bullitt said, "Don't go for a minute. I've got something to check up over there. Generators." He vanished into a small shed. I heard the thud of diesel engines. Then, quickly, silently, and doubtless in accordance with a well-conceived plan that had been executed on several earlier occasions, the pickaninnies swarmed out of hiding and gathered on both sides of the shed door. When Bullitt came out, they fell on him again. This time Bullitt pretended to be taken by surprise, to be hard put to defend himself. Boys and girls clustered over him like bunches of black grapes, hanging on to his boots, his knees, and the bottoms of his shorts, shrieking with delight. The whole village turned out to watch the fun. Huge teeth gleamed, dazzling white, in the black grinning faces. Suddenly, I saw a familiar bowl-shaped haircut bobbing energetically through the crowd. A small, disheveled demon materialized behind Bullet's back, and yelling like a savage, forced the native children to relinquish their grip for a moment. Then she sprang at Bullet's back, grabbed him by the neck, and swung herself up onto one shoulder. It had all happened so quickly, and anyway she was now wearing a new pair of overalls, faded blue this time, that it was only at this point that I recognized Patricia's characteristic features, in particular her slender neck and urchin haircut. As Bullet had his back to me, I could not see the expression on his daughter's face, but it was not hard to guess from her movements. With her left hand, she grabbed Bullet's chin and squeezed it as though she would choke him. With her right, she snatched off his big bush hat. Then she plunged both hands into his thick auburn hair, pulling and kneading it. For Patricia, words were now superfluous. Her every gesture proclaimed her fierce affection and triumphant possessiveness. "Look at this noble giant," she seemed to say, "this warden of a national park. Look at him well. He belongs to me, and to no one else. I can do what I like with him." And Bullet, with Patricia's heels hammering in his ribs, and his head going round both literally and metaphorically, accepted the horse's role, thus thrust upon him. He pranced and curveted, arcing his neck and laughing delightedly. Patricia gazed round her audience, face flushed with pride and excitement. Suddenly her expression froze. Had she spotted me? She slid down Bullet's body as though he were a tree, flung herself on the pickaninnies, and dragged them after her. They all rolled on the ground in a confused heap. Bullet picked up his bush hat, but before putting it on, he ran one big hand very gently through his disordered hair, which Patricia's attentions had reduced to a wild tangle. A vague, abstracted smile, full of pride and adoration, spread over his face. "Come on," he said to me, after a moment or so. "I'll see you home." Regretfully, I turned away from that whirlwind of red dust and black bodies, where a pair of pastel blue overalls could still be glimpsed, momentarily, through the melee. Chapter 9. My bungalow, though I had not realized this, was in fact quite near at hand. The native village and the visitor's compound were completely hidden from each other by forest and scrub. Each formed a private domain, invisible and apparently inaccessible from the other. As we reached the veranda steps, I asked Bullet if he would like a drink. Without waiting for his reply, a trick I had learned from him, I went in and opened a bottle of whiskey. It was nearly midday. The light fell vertically beyond the open veranda, like a sheet of incandescent metal. The tree shadows had shrunk to nothing, leaving the ground bare and baking. We drank in a comfortable, friendly silence, here in the center of a blazing universe, which seemed about to reach fusion point at any moment. Two men sat together under the same roof, sharing a common condition of relaxed and delicious idleness, with the same alcoholic magic warming their palates and coursing through their blood streams. two men who felt in physical harmony with one another and saw their friendship growing of its own accord. "Pity you're off so soon," Bullet said, his voice slurred and barely audible. "Great pity. You couldn't stay, I suppose." "Impossible. Got a seat booked on the plane." My lips moved just enough to articulate the words. Bullet sighed, and just when I had an agreeable guest for once. He drank what was left of his whiskey and sat contemplating his glass. I refilled it. "Tourist," he said, "you've simply no idea what they can be like." Slowly, between sips of whiskey, he told me about them. There was the lady who insisted on taking all her jewelry when camping at the foot of Kilimanjaro, only to see a monkey run off with it from her breakfast table one morning. There were the guests who complained because their bungalows weren't equipped with refrigerators, and at the opposite extreme, the adventurous-minded types who took their camp beds out into the bush. There were also the optimistic luxury hunters who expected the reserve to be something like the famous Treetops Hotel in Nairi. What they wanted was to sit up aloft on specially constructed platforms, drinking champagne and watching the animals by floodlight. And there were the lovers who showed a well-marked tendency to play lion and tiger fantasies with each other. And when you think, Bullet concluded, his voice somewhat more animated now, that if one of these creatures, either through stupidity, awkwardness, or bloody-minded conceit, breaks any of the rules, and as a result is attacked by a wild animal, it's the animal that my rangers have to kill. "What would you do," I inquired, "if this wasn't one of your duties?" Bullet parried this. "The only good thing about knowing your exact duties," he observed, "is that it means you don't have to worry about that kind of problem." I was about to reply, but he abruptly motioned me to keep quiet. Then he pointed with one finger, out and up, beyond the veranda. Following his indication, I saw, protruding above the branches of an acacia tree, and looking as though it were attached to them, a most remarkable head that moved with delicate grace from leaf to leaf. It was slender and tapering, with flat, ingenious features, dappled here and there, the color of pale leather. Its ears were neat little triangles, set sharply erect, and it had long, thick, voluptuous eyelashes, as black and silky as an odalisque's. It was, in fact, a young giraffe, picking its food with most circumspect elegance from among the thorns and prickles. Behind it I could see a second, even larger specimen. "The mother," Bullet whispered. I saw an immense neck, its texture that of watered silk, swaying slowly to and fro like a tree trunk in a gale. The big giraffe now decided to browse from the same tree as its offspring, and the two of them presented a remarkable picture as they stood there side by side. The mother's head was an exact, though much larger copy of the one I had first noticed. She had the same dappled muzzle, prickled ears, and enormous eyelashes, which gave the impression of having been painted with mascara. I contemplated this gentle, two-headed monster in fascinated amazement. The two heads, one after the other, slowly worked their way down from branch to branch till they vanished altogether. You see how trusting and happy the wild creatures are here, Bullet said. Giraffes are generally reckoned one of the most shy and easily frightened species, yet they habitually wander right up to the bungalows. Bullet's chin was resting on his fist as he spoke. The fist seemed bigger than ever, and the jaw more square and solid. The whiskey he had just drunk inflamed the tiny red veins in his eyes, yet the great brick-red face was radiant with a kind of luminous happiness. The shy hope of seeing a private vow fulfilled. It was almost unbelievable. Odd mug for a wild animal's wet nurse, eh? Said my companion disconcertingly. Well, I temporized, that isn't the side of you they talk about in Nairobi. You're the great Bull Bullet there. Bull Bullet, eh? Said the warden heavily. His chin settled further into his fist, and his face became expressionless. That's a nickname I haven't heard in a long while. It fits you well, though, I said. He slowly raised his big, torn head. Oh, I know that, he remarked. I did my best to make it famous, too. Bull Bullet, the ivory poacher, with a sideline in rhino horns. Bull Bullet, the professional hunter, the hired gunman, the man who exterminated big game throughout God knows how many districts. That's certainly the legend that stuck to you all over East Africa, I said. Bullet said, Legend. It was the sober truth. He got to his feet in one quick movement and gripped the balustrade of the veranda with both hands. It shook and groaned protestingly beneath those huge fingers. What else could I do? He cried. The words were not so much addressed to me as to the clearing, the pool, and Kilimanjaro itself, still and neutral, now in this still, neutral light. He came back to the table and sat down. I was given a gun, he said, as a bribe to make me learn my ABCs. My father took me on safari before I was 10. Instead of bedtime stories, I had tales of hunting and legendary hunters. I was stuffed and gorged with big game legend. They taught me to track animals, like a native, and to shoot between the eyes if I couldn't sight behind the shoulder for a shot to the heart. And then, when I decided to become a professional hunter, my father quite suddenly did an about-face. He was furious at the idea. He insisted on packing me off to school in England. No ifs or buts. Up to this point, Bullet had been talking more to himself than to me, but now he addressed me personally. Can you imagine what that meant? He demanded. No more campfires, no more sunlit days in the bush, no more wild game roving freely around me. Instead, I would have a narrow life, divided between dormitory, dining hall, classrooms, and prep. There was only one way out for me, and I took it. I ran away from home with a rifle and cartridge belt, determined to make a livelihood by using them. And so I did, a good one. With these final words, a heavy note of melancholy crept into Bullet's voice. He sat in silence for a while. On his face was that dreamy, incredulous, nostalgic expression that old men assume when they mull over their youthful joys and follies, as though observing the actions of a totally different person. Yet Bullet himself was not yet 40. It was not too difficult to guess at the memories that were passing through his uncomplicated mind. His earlier career as adventurer and ivory hunter was a legend that had spread from the shores of the Indian Ocean to the great African lakes. Anywhere you went, from the Nairobi bars to a Uganda hotel, or the big estates in Tanganyika and Kivu, you could always find men ready to tell you about the fabulous Bull Bullet, as he had been in his heyday. One would speak of his physical strength and powers of endurance, another of his incredible stubbornness, a third of his audacity, a fourth of his marksmanship and uncanny tracking skills. Each would back up his opinion with really staggering anecdotes. They spoke of herds of elephants that Bullet had decimated for the sake of the ivory that Indian middlemen shipped abroad to the Far East, and of countless buffalo slaughtered and sold to the natives for their meat, and of lions and tigers shot down for the price their skins would fetch. They recounted missions that Bullet had undertaken for the government, clearing wild beasts from certain areas where they were proving a real menace. There were tales of vigils without number in treetop mountains, which destroyed man-eaters and cattle killers, and freed whole villages from the haunting fear of lion sorcerers and magic leopards. Years of trekking and stalking, endless patience, risks calculated and taken, all those intermingled against a background of wild life, the boundless bush, and the constellations of the African night. Here were some of the pictures, I thought, which must be passing through Bullet's memory now. I felt quite sure of it when he said, as though in a dream, "Kahoro remembers those days." The sound of his own voice brought him back to present-day realities, but not entirely, since he then exclaimed, "How is such a thing possible?" Seeing that I had failed to grasp what his question referred to, he went on impatiently, "It's very simple, really. If you want to shoot wild animals skillfully, you have to understand them through and through. In order to understand them, you have to love them, and the greater your love, the more of them you kill. In fact, it's even worse than that in practice. The degree of your love is an exact indication of your need to kill and the pleasure you derive from the act. After that, it makes no difference whether you go hungry or not, or whether you show a profit or a loss, with or without a license, in scheduled or forbidden territory, in pursuit of a dangerous carnivore, or some harmless bush buck. It's all one. If your intended victim possesses beauty, nobility, or charm, if he stirs you to the depths of your heart by his strength and gracefulness, then you kill, kill, kill. Why? For God's sakes, why?" "I don't know," I said. "Perhaps the moment before you fire is the only time you can feel that the beast truly belongs to you." "Perhaps," Bullet said. and shrugged. A herd of a gazelle passed across the middle of the clearing, against the backdrop of Kilimanjaro. Their slender horns, swept back almost horizontally, curved with the graceful symmetry of a wing in flight. Bullet watched them go. Then he said, "Today it makes my heart glad to look at them, just to look at them. But in the old days, I would have picked out the biggest, fastest buck with the finest coat, and I wouldn't have missed." "Was it your marriage that changed you?" I asked. "No, it happened before I'd even met Sybil. I'm not sure if I can even explain it very well. One day you fire, and the animal goes down in the usual way, but you suddenly realize that the victory leaves you quite indifferent. That strongest of all emotions, the bloodlust, whatever you like to call it, simply isn't there anymore." Bullet ran one large hand through the thick red mat of hair that covered his chest. "You go on out of sheer habit till the day comes when you can't go on any longer. Your love for these wild beasts has changed. Now you want to watch them live, not make them die." Bullet walked to the veranda steps and stood looking out over the vast landscape, all shimmering now with heat haze. "I'm not the only case," he said. "Every warden of a national park is a former professional hunter, a converted killer, you might say." He smiled mirthlessly. "But just as I was a more successful and ruthless killer than the rest of them, so now I've gone further than they have, to the other extreme. Question of temperament, I suppose. And besides—" Bullet left his sentence hanging in mid-air. Then he turned his gaze toward the far end of the clearing, where the pool now seemed a mere pewter-gray mirror to the sunlight. "Is that where Patricia joined the beast?" he asked. "Indeed it is. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." Bullet said, "When your intentions toward them are wholly innocent, the beasts know it." He turned to face me, and seemed, as had struck me several times before, to be searching my features for some explanatory sign which he could not discover. At last he said, "Kahoro informed me that you and the child had a long talk together. Patricia was very friendly, affectionate even, I told him. At least she was, till she remembered that I was leaving tomorrow. From that moment, I was no longer her friend." "Yes," Bullet said softly, "I can understand that." He shut his eyes. His shoulders slumped brokenly, and his arms hung limp. He looked like some great sick animal himself. "She had to feel absolutely alone," he murmured. Then he blinked his eyes open and said, "Are you really sure you can't stay a little longer?" I said nothing. "We have a radio link with Nairobi every morning and evening," Bullet insisted. There was a humble, almost beseeching note in his voice. "You could get them to change the date of your booking." I said nothing. "I suppose everyone has their various duties in this life," Bullet said finally. Then he went without a glance in my direction, just as Patricia had done. Chapter 10. I left the veranda and went inside for lunch. The steep, pointed roof of thatch and the thick mud-plastered walls combined to produce at least a sensation of coolness. Bogo had opened some tins and a bottle of beer. I asked him if he had seen Patricia again. He said, "No, sir," and relapsed into silence. Knowing him as I did, I had hardly hoped for anything else. Nevertheless, the tiny geometrical figures into which the countless wrinkles on his cheeks and forehead naturally fell, triangles, squares, circles, were now working in a strange fashion. He went on, as though despite himself I not seen the little white girl again, but everyone hereabouts in the village talked to me about her. Bogo broke off, hesitating. I pretended to be absorbed in my food. Any question might scare him off the subject for good. It was surprising enough that he wanted to talk about it at all. Folks, Bogo said, love her very much, but she scare them. She scares them, I exclaimed. She bewitched the animals, Bogo said, lowering his voice. She sorceress. Someone swear to me her daddy a lion. Thinking of Bullet's face, I said, "What are they really trying to say? That her father is like a lion?" "No, sir," Bogo corrected me. "These folk mean a real lion." His voice had lost much of its usual neutrality, and the rugged, squamish skin that covered his face had turned from black to a dirty gray, as though fear had drained the pigmentation out of it. And yet Bogo was a Christian, dressed in European clothes, and read English-language Kenya newspapers. "Do you really believe that's possible?" I asked him. "Everything possible, sir," my driver whispered. "Everything, if God will it." What was he thinking of? The God of the missionaries, or those other hoary powers rooted for countless centuries in the dark soil of Africa? Softly he went on. People seen this little girl in the bush, lying down alongside a great lion, and the lion, he hold her between his front paws, like she was his own baby. "Who's seen that?" I asked. "Folk," Bogo answered. "People." "What people?" "Folk who seen it, folk who know," Bogo said, and stared at me unhappily. I couldn't make up my mind if he wanted me to share his fear or hold myself superior to it. "Come now, Bogo," I said. "Think of all the travelers' tales we've heard on this trip that you've translated for me. In Uganda, people had seen panther men. In Tanganyika, it was snake men. On Lake Victoria, there were even some people who'd talked to Latumb, the great crocodile god. And he's 1,000 years old if he's a day." "That quite right, sir," Bogo said. Had I convinced him? His voice was once more completely neutral. His features had returned to their habitual inscrutability. A ranger came into the bungalow, and Bogo translated his message. This ranger, he said, was at my disposal for the remainder of my visit. Besides, regulations demanded it. It was forbidden to go anywhere in the national park unless escorted by an armed guard. The ranger got into our car, rifle and all, and sat down in the front seat beside Bogo. I retired to the back. The reserve was a vast area, stretching on for mile upon mile. Scrub gave place to woodland, woodland to open savanna, with occasional hills and mountain peaks. Always in the background, the colossal massif of Kilimanjaro brooded, crowned with snow, keeping watch over the wild, burning lands far below. Everywhere, too, there was wildlife visible in abundance. I had never seen so many zebras and ostriches, gazelles and antelopes, such enormous herds of buffalo, or such prolific families of giraffes. There was no fence, or hedge, or visible mark of any kind to separate the reserve from the ordinary bush outside. Its boundaries could only be traced on maps or surveys, yet the animals seemed instinctively aware of this frontier. They appeared to know and to pass on the knowledge by some mysterious language of their own, that here was their land of refuge, their sanctuary. At first, the magnificent scenery and sheer profusion of animal life held me entranced, but after a very short time I found that it was just this breathtaking perfection which was responsible for my growing feeling of irritation, even of active resentment. Every time I stopped the car and tried to get close to the animals, on foot, the ranger restricted my movements to a few yards on either side of the track, and still kept at my side like a shadow. If I wanted the car to follow one of the innumerable tracks that wandered away into the woods or hills, toward the shadow of the jungle with its teeming lairs, the ranger would forbid it. We had no authority to deviate in the slightest degree from the official legal itinerary. This followed a large highway which ran the entire length of the reserve, and from which one or two side lanes, constructed by Bullet, occasionally branched off. I remembered the scathing comments he had made to me about tourists, and the precautions he took to ensure that they were kept out of trouble. I was one of them, it seemed, neither more nor less. If this day of mine in the reserve had been passed in the normal fashion, as most visitors spent it, I should doubtless have been very happy to contemplate its splendors from the prescribed viewpoint. But Bullet had promised to show me all its secret sanctuaries, and above all, I had watched at the pool at dawn, with Patricia beside me. From time to time, the ranger would point a long black bony hand to the right or left, and say Simba or Timbo. These words, the only ones I knew in his language, meant that in some distant, thorny thicket, where I was forbidden to go, lions had their den, or that over on the other side, out of sight, behind those low volcanic hills, which were out of bounds for me, herds of elephant roamed, and still my car sped on down the official road. I had the feeling of being punished, deprived, frustrated, cheated of my due. Finally, heat and dust helped to break down my willpower. I couldn't stand it any longer, and told Bogo to turn round and drive back to camp. Outside my bungalow, the ranger came to attention. Snapping his black, naked heels together and flicking up one black bony hand to his khaki tarbouche in a smart salute. Then he slung his rifle over his shoulder and strolled off toward the native village. The smile he flashed me as he went was as brilliant as his flat, polished brass buttons. He had accomplished his mission to protect me from the animals and from myself. I glanced up at the sun. I still had an hour or so to spare before going over to Bullett's bungalow for tea. What was to be done with this time? The heat haze was now completely gone. The sky was a pure, lucid transparency. Light and shade had renewed their checkered patterns on the ground and against the great sweep of the mountain. On its flat, lopped-off summit, a fantastic white marble slab, like some altar made ready for a cosmic sacrifice. The motionless, eternal snow was now coming to life. Its surface foamed and glowed, mysteriously, as though it were a great breaking wave, whose crest and trough flickered with changing lights, orange and vermilion, pearl gray and gold. There were no beasts now at the far end of the clearing. The birds were silent, and the monkeys had stopped their chattering. Not a bough or a leaf stirred among the trees. Not a single thorn crackled along the bush tracks. It was the moment of silence, rest and intermission, now charged with all its solemn powers. Dusk had not yet fallen, yet an anticipation of darkness hung in the air. The sun seemed to hang, suspended and motionless, before handing over the world, with all its creatures, to the spreading wings of night. "What orders, sir?" Bogo asked me. It was not the actual sound of his voice that made me shiver, but the fact that it brought me back to immediate reality, to the presence, as it were, of my physical self. A moment before there had been some fraction of time, a minute, a second, perhaps only a part of a second, during which I ceased to exist in the miserable, restrictive dimensions of human life. I'd been lost utterly in a boundless universe. I and the universe were one. But Bogo had spoken, and instantly I found myself solidified, scaled down to my physiological elements. It was as though I had been sewn back into my skin against my will, and worse than that, I was compelled to issue orders, to act, to do something. What was there I could do that would be in harmony with the bush and the African snows, as evening enfolded them? Out of the cover of the scrub emerged two men, two Maasai. Chapter 11. I knew they were Maasai the instant I saw them, despite my lack of experience. A traveler may easily become confused between Jalos, Imbu, Wakamba, Kikuyu, Muru, Kisibiyu, and many of the other native tribes that inhabit Kenya. But if, in his wanderings through the great parched plains and torrid bush country, he has ever run into a group of Maasai, one encounter would be quite sufficient. He will never forget them or mistake them for anyone else. These two had the characteristic gait, indolent yet springy. They walked like princes. They had that superb poise of the head, that special way of carrying their spears, and the drape of cloth they wore over one shoulder, which at one and the same time covered their body and revealed its splendid nakedness. They had the mysterious beauty which they had inherited from their ancestors, black men who had migrated from the Nile by unknown routes untold centuries ago. Their features and movements alike betrayed a strange bravura, extravagant and inspired. Above all, there was a quality of freedom about them, the proud, absolute, indescribable freedom of a people who envy no man or race on earth. Their heritage is poor enough in material terms. A few poor head of cattle, the primitive weapons they make from the ore they find in the dry river beds. These fulfill all their needs. Their pride is so intense that they never leave either house or grave on the face of the earth. The two Maasai, who had just appeared, now skirted round the edge of the compound. They held their heads high and straight, and both moved at the same quick, light, easy pace. Yet one of them was an old man, and the other a moraine. This means that he belonged to a special age group, defined by ancient tribal custom. When the young warriors emerge from their period of adolescence to become their family's pride and the chosen elite of the clan, they have no other duties for a period of years except to be courageous and handsome, and to display these attributes in public. The special distinguishing mark of this privileged group is their bushy hair. Now most of the natives in East Africa, men and women alike, keep their heads clean-shaven from childhood to the grave. The moraines are the only exception to this rule. For the whole of their young adult life in the tribe, they never so much as touch their thick, kinky hair with razor or scissors. For this reason, as soon as it has grown well down over their forehead, they devote much time and ingenuity to its adornment. They rub it with sap of a certain plant, the effect of which is to induce a quicker and stronger growth. They plait it in fine ropes, no thicker than a strand of liana, and then interweave the plaits themselves, till they form a solid, crimped mass. This they rub daily with cow's fat, till it acquires a shining, lacquered surface without a chink anywhere. Finally they coat it over with a layer of clay and red mud. By this time it is no mere head of hair that these young men so proudly display, but a unique, outlandish thing, a cross between a nest of tawny, petrified serpents, a burning bush, and a bronze helmet, with its pointed beaver overshadowing a pair of savage eyebrows in front, and curving down behind onto its owner's ebony neck. The old man and the moraine were coming toward my hut. I told Bogo to ask them to stop for a moment. But Bogo stammered. His face, under its network of wrinkles, had gone papery gray. But these are Maasai, he concluded wretchedly. Bogo himself was a Kikuyu. He remembered only too well how the Maasai, those herdsmen of the bare savannas, those rootless, merciless nomads, those born warriors, had for long centuries razed, burned, and exterminated the villages of his more sedentary tribe. It was true that the English had put a stop to the slaughtering of Kikuyu, but a few peaceful years were not enough to wipe out such archetypal terrors from the victims' minds. "I am here with you," I said to Bogo gently, "and the rangers, with their rifles, aren't too far away." "That's true, sir," Bogo muttered, but when he spoke to the Maasai, his voice was completely toneless. "Kahiri," he said, which was clearly a conventional form of greeting. The eyes of the two Maasai, standing there, black and naked, under the robes draped from their shoulders, merely glanced at this other black man who dressed like a European. But Bogo's wrinkled skin became even ashier gray than before. Their expression conveyed a degree of contempt, little short of sheer disgust. It was the way you might look at a caterpillar before squashing it underfoot and forgetting it. Bogo might have adapted himself to new customs, but the Maasai never changed. "Kahiri," I said in my turn. The Moraine waited to see what line the old man would take. The old man's eyes met mine. He stared hard at me, summing me up. Obviously I was not his equal. No other race on earth could, man for man, match the Maasai. On the other hand, I was white, and thus a stranger on this earth, a distinguished visitor. Politeness to me would involve no loss of face. "Kahiri," the old man said, graciously, if with a certain hauteur. "Kahiri," said the Moraine. Both his voice and face remained totally devoid of expression. The old man now planted his tall spear in the ground before him. One sharp thrust was enough. Then he stood there waiting, as straight and erect as the spear itself. The Moraine, who had kept his spear at his side, now leaned on it, holding it with both hands. This movement bent his neck and torso into a shallow arc. Was he, I wondered, trying to show me that even when an aged Maasai chief felt obliged to behave courteously, his own privileged position permitted, demanded even, that he shouldn't remain insolently aloof? Or did he know instinctively that the pose he had adopted was the one best calculated to show off his astounding good looks? His youthful body resembled that of some athletic Greek warrior just emerged from adolescence. Under the black, lustrous skin, rippled muscles, which for all their fine-drawn delicacy were enormously powerful, nothing could better emphasize his strength, vitality, and sheer animal beauty than this slight, nonchalant twist of the body. His face seemed lit from within by a glowing golden fire. His mouth was strong, his nose straight and firm, while his great eyes, bright with indolence, yet contained a glint of fiery savageness in their still depths. Crowning everything was the great dressed mass of hair, like burnished copper, his whole head resting on one naked black half-bent arm, blended in its expression a relaxed sleepy tenderness and the cruelty of a primitive mask. Such vigorous, youthful beauty, now in its first and finest flower, could break every rule made for lesser mortals. This was no less than its due. The Moraine stood there, awaiting our admiration, as fierce, subtle, and innocent as a black panther that sprawls in the sun, stretching out his sleek, velvety murderer's paws. What more could one ask of him? I made Bogo ask him his name. The moraine himself contemptuously kept silent. It was the old man who answered for him. He said, "His name is Oriyonga." Then he added, "And I am called Okolu." Then he asked me a brief question, which Bogo translated. "He want to know, Sa, why you here?" "Tell him because of the wild animals." Okolu spoke again. "He don't understand." Bogo interpreted. "He say, no one can kill animals here. Then why you come?" There was a silence at this. Then I asked what the two Maasai were doing in the reserve themselves. Okolu said, "We are searching for grazing land, for our herds, and a place for our families to camp." His cheek resting on one arm, and the arm itself propped against his spear. The moraine stood there staring at me through long, drooping eyelashes. His stance conveyed a fascinating impression of lazy arrogance. Silence fell once more, but this time I could think of nothing further to say. The aged Maasai raised one hand in a gesture of farewell. This movement dislodged the cloth draped over his shoulder. It fell away, leaving his whole body exposed, and revealing a gigantic furrowed scar that ran down his lean, scrawny torso from neck to groin. This horrid cicatrice, with its puckered ridges and deep sunken pits of scar tissue, had the tint and texture of cured meat or dry clotted blood. Okolu, seeing me stare at it, remarked, "The hide of even the best-made shield cannot stand up to a lion's claws." The old man plucked his spear from the ground and examined it thoughtfully. It was long and heavy, yet beautifully balanced, sharpened at both ends, and equipped halfway down the shaft with a cylindrical metal hilt designed to fit its warrior owner's grasp. It could equally well serve as throwing spear or javelin. Okolu shook this spear in one hand, while the fingers of the other traced the course of his frightful scar. He said, "Those were the days when the whites did not interfere with the moraine's amusements." Oriyonga opened his sleepy eyes under their coppery golden helmet of hair and smiled. His teeth were regular, pointed, and as white as any carnivore's. "Obey the white man if you like." This pitiless smile seemed to say, "It is a long time since you were a moraine, but I am one now, in all my courage and pride. The only law I recognize is my own desire." The two Maasai moved off, their gait as indolent and springy as ever. From a distance, their figures displayed, in silhouette, a precision of line and gracefulness of movement, which, together with the spears they carried, suggested a resemblance to the hunters in a prehistoric cave painting. "What orders, sir?" Bogo asked me. But there was nothing left for me to do in this place, where men were more alien and secretive and inaccessible than the wild beasts themselves. "Go and pack," I told him. "We're leaving first thing tomorrow